Hello guys, today we will be installing SQL Server Failover cluster instance on SMB 3.0. It would be, the storage would be shared disk, and the most important thing is that this is a simple cluster installation, but actually we will be doing this on a shared disk. So for this SQL Server FCI, we will be using two nodes as a SQL Server failover cluster, and there will be a third operating system in which we will be creating Windows share. So let me just show you how we will start to create the share, and then we will move towards creating the cluster, Windows cluster, and eventually we will create failover SQL Server failover cluster instance on that particular share. So otherwise, generally we will be using Windows cluster with raw disks or any kind of shared disk, which has to be mounted on both the both the machines, virtual machine or a physical machine. But in this scenario, there will be no disk which is mounted on the uh, SQL Server nodes. So to start with, we will open Server Manager in File and Storage Services. We will just create a new share. So we will be using SMB share, which is for applications and databases. The concept is very simple. We will just create a standard share, and the service account for SQL Server engine should have access on this particular share, and that's all. So we will name it SQL FCI. Just we have to make sure that the service account. I'm using the domain admin, but in actual production systems, you will have separate service account for the SQL Server production, SQL Server service account for production systems. So you have to assign permission for this particular share to that service account. So we already have this, so we are good to go. So now we have created this. We'll just make sure that once we open this, and we will try to access it from other nodes. This is the first node, and this is the second node. So if you have already if you have created this for the first time, so you will have to create a folder, because I have already done that. So there is an empty folder inside, and that's all. So then we will start to create the failover cluster instance. So before that, we will go to Server Manager for both the nodes, and we will add features. And we will add failover cluster on both the nodes, SQL Node 1 and SQL Node 2. So once the installation is completed, we will restart the systems and we will start to create Windows cluster, and then we will proceed accordingly. Okay, so the first node is done. We will just restart this machine. This is also completed. We will just restart this machine as well. Okay, so to create the Windows cluster, we will open Failover Cluster Manager. We will click on Create Cluster. Here we will add both the nodes name as we have to perform the tests. And just to speed up, because we don't have the shared storage, we will remove the storage. And to speed up the process, we will just exclude the service packs. And the software updates with drivers, as this takes most of the time. So let's start. Here we will just create a DNS in SQL CLU01, and for example, like 150. As we do not have any eligible storage, so we will uncheck this. So if the communication is allowed between all the nodes and you have the permission to create the cluster and the DNS computer object and DNS entry, it will create the Windows cluster successfully. Okay, so we are done with the Windows cluster. Let's start with the SQL Server installation. So we'll be using SQL Server 2019. And also we will just keep this share handy as locally it will be available like this. Okay. So in the SQL Server installation, we will choose the installation page, and then we will choose new SQL Server Failover cluster cluster installation. For this machine, we will be using Developer Edition, but you can use your license here. Okay, so I do have warnings in the cluster. You have to review it. If they are fine, you can ignore them. You have to review and clear the errors and warnings. So for this lab, we will just proceed. and we will choose just SQL Server Core Engine. For the network name, we will use any available DNS. So for example, SQL CLU dev01. And here, if we are using the shared disks, we will choose the role which has the appropriate disk. But because we are not using any shared disks which have any role, so that's why we will not be selecting any role. So we will just proceed next. And because we have not specified any storage, so there is no qualifying storage available here. Here we will specify the IP. We will just confirm that the IP is already not used. Okay, so this is fine. In the server configuration, we will grant volume maintenance task, and we will use the administrator, the domain administrator, but in the production environment and in your office, you have to use appropriate service account. I'll be using mixed mode, and we'll be adding current system. And for the directories, I'll be using a single share location. But obviously, for the production system, you can have different drives for system databases, data files, log files, backups, and obviously tempdb as well. For tempdb, obviously, we can also use the local storage. So for this video, we'll be using the SNB. So there you have a warning that we have specified a file server. So we have to make sure that the SQL Server engine has appropriate permissions. So we will accept that. So it should have a full control. So yes, we already gave it full control, and we will proceed next and do the installation. Okay, so the primary node installation is completed. And once we open the Windows cluster, we will see a role for the default instance. It is a clustered instance, and there is the DNS name, IP, main service, and the agent. So if we just open the Management Studio, we will to the DNS SQL CLU dev01, SQL CLU dev01, and there you go. You have a fully functional Windows cluster and a SQL Server cluster without any local or shared raw disks. It is working fine on the SMB. So we will just close this setup and we will add the second node. So the second node installation is pretty simple and standard. We will just open the installation file for SQL 2019. In the wizard, we will choose installation page, and then on this page, we will choose add node to SQL Server failover cluster. Okay, we will be using the developer option here, accept the license terms. Okay, so this is the same warning for the cluster. We'll just proceed with that. And we have to choose the cluster, the instance, for which we have to add another node. In this scenario, it's the default instance. And already we have SQL node 01 added. So we are adding SQL node 02 as the second node of the cluster. Here we have to just make sure this IP is correct, and obviously that is the correct one. And next we will just provide the service account credentials. We will grant the permission for volume maintenance tasks. Okay. So now we will just add this node to the cluster. Okay, so the installation for the second node is also completed, and this was pretty straightforward. So now you can just go back to the failover cluster manager, and then we can just try to failover this to the second node. And with this, you can see that there are no disks to be unmounted and disconnected from one node and then connected to the other node and mount back. So the failover process is much quick and it's much faster. So we can easily see this is working perfectly fine as expected. And you can create any database. It will be so you will see that it is creating here. We can see the physical files, and obviously for this test we are using only a single share. For the production systems we can create multiple shares and use local disk as a for the temp DB, which is otherwise recommended. So thank you guys for watching, and leave your comments below and let me know what do you think about this. So creating failover cluster instance without iSCSI or raw desks using just a network share. I will link the Microsoft documentation in the description below. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.